We've now got an opportunity, 10 minutes or so before coffee, to ask questions of both Donald for what's going on in Scotland, but also to ask Mostak about HMEP, where it's got to. And I know I've heard lots of good comments about HMEP. I've also heard lots of critical comments about HMEP. But whatever your view is, what's happening now is significantly different to how these issues were dealt with by DFT before. And the point that was made by Steve Gooding earlier, and Mostak's just made it, that they're not now just telling us what they have to do without consulting. What's coming out of here, the contribution for what's coming out of here, is being delivered by many of the people in this room. Your frustrations, your thoughts about how it could be done better are being built into the programme. And so that the plea to get involved and make a contribution to it is really important. So if you could just wait until somebody brings you a microphone and then tell us who you are and where you come from, because perhaps I should have told you earlier, it's all being recorded, so be careful what you say. So the first questions come from a little gentleman at the back. Stand up, sir.
Good morning all. Joe Dowling from CWC, Collaborative Working Centre. I've got a question for Mostak. We put together the Collaborative Alliance Toolkit, the standard contract, and we're also putting together this shared service toolkit. So we've got a vested interest in everything that is on the HMEP programme. And I applaud, and I'm sure everyone in the room applauds, DFT's investment, which was 6 million, initial 6 million over the 2-year period. While quite significant, one could say as a percentage on that spend profile, it is also fairly small, nevertheless fairly key. So my question to Mostak is, what are the plans for further financial support to the sector after this initial 6 million funding runs out?
Okay, thank you. First of all, I should say the 6 million hasn't run out just yet. So we've got quite a bit of headroom still, despite starting a number of projects right now. I did mention earlier that we are thinking about a longer-term model for running this program, and we've taken soundings from the sector, both kind of public and private sector. It's fair to say there are a range of views about how to do this. I mean, DFT will continue to be involved. Norman Baker, when he launched this, it was initially launched as a 2-year program, but reflecting some of the feedback that we received about many of these transformations, efficiencies, cannot be done in 2 years, and actually an indication of longer-term DFT involvement would be helpful. The Minister did respond by saying, yes, in principle, DFT will continue to be involved over a longer time period. However, I think there is a question about whether the same level of DFT resources, financial, it will be required on an ongoing basis. Once you've pump primed, developed many of the products, what's the sustainable model going forward, and what can the kind of sector do itself, if ultimately both local authorities and industry are actually gaining by having a more efficient local highway sector. So I think we'd be keen to, from DFT perspective, to move to a model where there's more kind of co-funding of some way. The precise balance is up for debate, and we are, as I said, looking at options for that.
Okay, some more hands? You can't go for coffee until there's one more. There we go. One down here. Susie. Table 10.
Thank you, Miles Butler, President of ADEPT. Mostak, this may be a bit unfair. Steve Gooding invited us to ask you questions about the devolution of majors. Obviously, this is kind of work in progress that you're beginning to get towards some conclusions.
Yes.
Could I just perhaps invite you to say a little bit about where we are and perhaps just comment on the impact of that for the industry, for the sector?
Sure. Yes. Good that you asked that question rather than about the strategic road network. That is one of my policies, so I am able to say what's happening. So, just in case some of you aren't aware, so we consulted on a more decentralised approach to funding local major transport projects in England, outside of London. So that's kind of, say, new road scheme, public transport, moving away from a model where DFT sought bids from individual local authorities, assessed them, made decisions, to a model where we are relying more on kind of local decisions and local accountability and transparency. So following the consultation, we published in September our government response, which was broadly in line with the earlier consultation proposals, and we've set out kind of the broad framework on how this will be delivered. So local transport boards consisting of local authorities and local enterprise partnerships and possibly others, covering the geography of local enterprise partnerships as a starting point. There are issues in some areas. Going forward, I think that would mean that in the past, places could bid for very large schemes to DFT because there was no kind of constraint on individual scheme size. Now, when we are devolving to, say, 38 kind of areas outside of London, clearly any given amount of money can only stretch so far. So I think that raises kind of challenges for the sector about how some of those kind of larger major projects, which in the past could have been just kind of bid for to DFT, are kind of funded. And I think that's where we would look to the sector as a whole to think about, in some cases, collaboration, where the individual allocations that we give to local transport boards aren't enough, but also pooling different sources of funding. And it goes back to the first slide I showed earlier on highway maintenance. In that example, you saw the DFT money was an important component of the overall funding for maintenance, but it was just one component. And I think going forward, places will need to think more imaginatively. In the past, there have been occasions where DFT provided 100% or 90% funding for a scheme. Actually, what are the other opportunities? Looking at developer contributions, looking at the business rates retention reforms, which will potentially provide another source of funding to areas for major projects. So it is about giving local areas a say in how they prioritize, because frankly, rather than us sitting at DFT, it's local areas that are better placed to decide how transport fits in with wider local economic development, housing, spatial planning. All these things should be brought together, and local transport boards, we think, are well placed to make those decisions without DFT scrutinizing every business case. We do have an assurance framework to safeguard value for money, but the decision on individual schemes will be with local transport boards, as we have made clear.
Okay, thanks, Mostak.